There are places that stay open long after they should have closed, not because someone forgot, but because something is still waiting. And tonight, I was the only one who walked inside. I didn't plan to be there that late, and if I'm honest with myself now, that's the part that still bothers me the most, because everything that happened afterward felt like the natural consequence of a small, ordinary decision I could have avoided. My name is Ethan. I was 29 at the time, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Santa Rosa, California, not far from where Highway 9 cuts through the darker, quieter stretches of Sonoma County. And the laundromat on Highway 9 was the only one open past midnight within a reasonable driving distance. I worked swing shifts at a distribution warehouse, the kind of job that keeps your sleep schedule permanently broken. And that night, I'd spilled a full cup of gas station coffee down the front of my uniform during my break, the kind loaded with sugar and creamer that leaves a sour smell no matter how many times you tell yourself it's fine. I could have waited until morning, worn something else, let it go. But I had this restless, itchy feeling I couldn't shake. The sense that if I didn't get it done right then, I'd just lie awake staring at the ceiling until my alarm went off. So I threw the clothes into a plastic hamper, grabbed my keys, and headed out just after 1:30 a.m., telling myself it would be a quick in and out, 30 minutes tops. Nothing unusual about it. Highway 9 at night is quieter than people expect, especially on weekdays. Long stretches of asphalt, lit only by the occasional street lamp or the distant glow of a passing truck, and the laundromat sat in a small concrete strip set back from the road, sharing a parking lot with a closed diner and a vape shop that had gone out of business months earlier. The sign above the laundromat was old, the blue neon open, flickering like it had a loose wire, and as I pulled in, I noticed there were only 2 other cars in the lot, both parked crookedly, like whoever left them hadn't cared much about lines. That should have been my first warning. Not because it was scary, but because it felt slightly off, like walking into a room after a conversation has already ended. Inside, the air smelled like warm detergent and damp fabric. That familiar mix that usually feels comforting, and the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, not enough to be annoying, just enough that you noticed it if you paid attention. There was no one at the counter, no attendant, just a small handwritten sign taped to the glass that read "Back in 10 minutes." The ink faded and smudged as if it had been there for years. I didn't think much of it. Lots of places run unattended at night. I chose a washer near the middle, loaded my clothes, poured in detergent, and started the cycle, the machine locking with a solid click that echoed louder than it should have in the empty room. I sat down on one of the plastic chairs bolted to the floor, set my phone beside me, and, for a few minutes, everything was exactly what I expected. Boring in the way late-night errands usually are. The steady churn of water, the hum of machines, the occasional thump as something inside hit the drum. That was when I realized the clock on the far wall, the cheap analog one with the laundromat's name printed across the bottom, wasn't moving. The second hand was stuck between ticks, frozen just past the 12, and the minute hand pointed straight up, reading 2:17. I checked my phone. It was 1:42. I remember feeling mildly annoyed, not scared, just thinking someone should really replace that thing. Because I hated when places let small stuff like that slide. I went back to scrolling, replying to a text from my sister, when the front door slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. the kind that makes you glance up automatically. No one walked in. The door stayed open for a second longer than necessary, then closed on its own. I sat there, staring at it, waiting for footsteps, for the sound of coins or a basket hitting the floor, but nothing followed. I told myself it was just the automatic sensor picking up a passing car's headlights, something like that, and went back to my phone. Though I noticed my thumb had slowed, my attention drifting back to the room around me. A few minutes later, I heard another washer start. Somewhere near the back, the unmistakable sound of water rushing in. And that's when I looked up again, because I was sure I'd been the only one there. I stood, walked between the rows, and saw one of the machines near the far wall shaking gently, its digital display lit, counting down from 28 minutes. I stared at it longer than I probably needed to, trying to reconstruct how I could have missed someone loading it, how I could have been so distracted. But the truth was, I hadn't been that absorbed in my phone, and the room wasn't that big. On the chair beside that machine sat a dark green jacket, heavy, canvas-like, the kind you'd wear in cold weather. And when I brushed my fingers against it, it was warm, not fresh from the dryer warm, but body warm, like someone had taken it off seconds ago. I remember standing there, listening, suddenly aware of how loud the machines were, how their noise filled the space in a way that made it hard to tell if there were other sounds layered beneath, like breathing, or footsteps softened by rubber soles. I called out, just a simple hello, my voice sounding too loud, too thin, and it disappeared into the hum without an answer. I told myself to mind my own business, went back to my seat, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not in a dramatic way, more like the awareness you get when you sit with your back to a window at night. I tried to focus on the rhythm of my washer, counting rotations, timing my breathing, and that's when I noticed the security monitor above the counter. The small screen divided into 4 grainy camera feeds. 3 of them showed empty angles of the laundromat, slightly distorted, the kind of fisheye view that makes straight lines curve. But the 4th camera, the one pointed directly at the seating area, showed me sitting there, hunched forward, scrolling on my phone. Except there was someone sitting directly behind me, close enough that their knee almost touched the back of my chair. The image was grainy, the lighting harsh, but I could make out the shape of a person, their head tilted slightly, their face turned toward the side of mine. I didn't move right away. I don't know why. Part of me thought if I stayed still long enough, the image would change, the feed would glitch, and I'd realize it was some kind of reflection or old footage looping. My heart started to beat harder, each thump loud in my ears, and when I finally turned around, there was no one there, just the empty row of chairs, the hum of machines, the smell of detergent. I looked back up at the monitor. The chair behind me was empty on the screen too. I stood, my hands shaking now, and walked back toward the counter, telling myself I needed to leave, that I could come back in the morning, that none of this mattered as much as my own safety. That's when the intercom crackled overhead. A burst of static, followed by a calm, almost tired voice saying my name. Ethan, drawn out slightly, like whoever said it wasn't used to speaking. I froze, every muscle locking, my mind racing through explanations that didn't quite land, thinking maybe an attendant had come back, maybe they recognized me, maybe I'd left my name somewhere. But deep down I knew none of that fit. I asked who it was, my voice barely steady, and there was a pause long enough that I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then the voice came back, quieter this time, saying, "You're running late." I didn't respond. I grabbed my clothes out of the washer, barely noticing the water dripping onto the floor, and headed for the door. But as I reached it, the machines went silent all at once, the sudden absence of sound pressing in on my ears. And the lights flickered, not off, just dimmer, like someone had turned a dial. The clock on the wall started ticking again, loudly, exaggerated, each second too pronounced. And when I glanced at it, it still read 2:17. The door didn't open when I pushed it. I slapped the button harder, panic creeping up my throat, and that was when I felt a presence behind me, not touching, just close enough that the air felt warmer, heavier. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The intercom crackled one last time, the voice softer now, almost apologetic, saying, "You're not done yet." Something brushed past my shoulder, a sleeve, a hand, I couldn't tell. And suddenly the door slid open, the night air rushing in, cold and sharp. I ran to my car, threw the clothes in the back, and drove without looking back, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go back to that laundromat again, even during the day, even when it was busy. And a few weeks later, I heard it had shut down for good. The building boarded up, the sign taken down. Sometimes, when I drive past that stretch of Highway 9 late at night, I swear I can still see the faint blue glow of an open sign in the distance, flickering against the dark. And every time I do, I feel that same heavy warmth at my back, the sense that something is waiting for me to finish what I started. And that next time, it won't let me leave. I didn't mean to stop there. And that's the part I keep replaying, because there were other options, even if they didn't feel good at the time. But exhaustion has a way of shrinking your world down to whatever is closest and still lit up. And that night, after nearly 8 hours of driving, the roadside motel outside Barstow, California felt like the only reasonable choice left. My name is Daniel. I was 34 then, recently divorced, in the middle of a long, lonely drive from Sacramento to Phoenix to clear out what was left of my mother's house. And I hadn't slept more than a few broken hours in days. I remember the stretch of Interstate 15 vividly, the way the desert seemed endless at night, dark sand and rock swallowing the headlights, the radio fading in and out as stations dropped off one by one, and that dull, creeping pressure behind my eyes that told me I was past the point of safe driving. When the motel sign appeared, a tall metal frame with a flickering red vacancy glowing against the black sky, I felt relief more than anything else, the kind that makes you loosen your grip on the steering wheel without realizing how tense you've been. The motel sat a little ways off the road, just beyond a shuttered gas station and a row of abandoned vending machines. And as I pulled into the lot, gravel crunching under my tires, I noticed how empty it was. Just my car and one old pickup parked near the far end, its paint dulled by years of sun. The office light was on, a warm yellow rectangle spilling out through dusty windows, and I remember thinking it looked almost inviting in that desolate way places sometimes do late at night. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cleaner and old carpet, and behind the counter stood a woman who looked to be in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, with gray hair pulled back tight and tired eyes that softened when she saw me. She didn't smile exactly, but her expression eased, like she'd been waiting for someone to walk in. I told her I needed a room for the night, Just one, no frills. And she nodded, reaching for a ledger instead of a computer, flipping through handwritten entries with careful fingers. "You're our last check-in tonight," she said casually, sliding a key across the counter attached to a faded plastic tag that read Room 6. And I don't know why that stuck with me, but it did. Maybe because of the way she said it. Not cheerful, not ominous, just matter of fact. Like it was an important detail I should remember. I paid in cash, signed my name, and when I glanced down at the ledger, I noticed my name was the only one written on the page for that date. The rest of the lines blank. I asked if they were usually that empty, and she shrugged, saying business had been slow for a while, that most people just passed through without stopping anymore. Before I left the office, she added, almost as an afterthought, "If you need anything, just knock," and gestured vaguely toward the back, though I didn't see a door leading anywhere else. Room 6 was on the ground floor, near the middle of the row, and as I unlocked it, the familiar motel smell hit me, a mix of detergent, dust, and something faintly metallic, like old air conditioning units. The room itself was exactly what you'd expect. One bed with a patterned spread, a small table with a lamp, a TV bolted to the dresser, and a window looking out onto the parking lot. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed, the silence settling in now that the door was closed. Thick and heavy, broken only by the low hum of the AC unit. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No traffic noise, no voices, just that steady mechanical sound. And for a moment, it was almost peaceful. I showered, letting the hot water pound against my shoulders, trying to wash off the road and the lingering stress of the past few weeks. And when I stepped out, wrapping a towel around my waist, I noticed the TV was on, the screen glowing softly in the dim room. I was sure I hadn't turned it on, but I told myself maybe it had come on automatically, some power glitch, and I shut it off, the sudden darkness making the room feel smaller. I lay down, the bed creaking under my weight, and checked my phone. No service bars, no notifications. The time reading 2:58 a.m. I remember that clearly because it was the last normal thing I saw that night. Sometime later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my door. Slow and deliberate, moving along the concrete walkway. I didn't sit up right away. Motels have sounds, people coming and going, doors opening and closing. And I was half asleep, my mind still foggy. But what caught my attention was how steady the steps were, not hurried, not dragging, just an even rhythm that passed my room, paused briefly, then continued. I rolled onto my side, listening, and that's when I heard a door open across from me. The soft click of a lock, followed by the low murmur of a television through the wall. Room 5. I stared at the ceiling, frowning, because I could have sworn I was the only guest. But again, I told myself I must have misunderstood. Maybe someone else checked in late. Maybe the woman at the desk had misspoken. The footsteps didn't return. I drifted back to sleep, uneasy but exhausted, and dreamed of my mother's house, empty rooms, and open doors. The feeling of being called from somewhere I couldn't see. I woke again later, this time fully alert, because the phone on the nightstand was ringing, the shrill sound cutting through the silence. I stared at it for a long second, my heart pounding, before picking it up, expecting to hear the front desk, maybe a wake-up call. But on the other end, there was only breathing, slow and shallow, like someone holding the receiver too close to their mouth. I said hello, my voice rough, and the breathing stopped. The line went dead. I hung up, my hand trembling slightly, and sat there, listening to the quiet rush back in. I checked the time. 3:03 a.m. I don't know why that bothered me more than it should have. But it did, the way the numbers felt precise, intentional. I got up, peered through the curtains, and saw the parking lot exactly as it had been before. My car, the old pickup, no new vehicles, no movement. The office light was off now, the windows dark. I thought about calling the front desk, then remembered the phone had just rung, and a wave of unease washed over me. Not panic, just a deep, sinking feeling that settled in my chest. I lay back down, telling myself I was overtired, that my mind was playing tricks on me, and eventually, despite everything, I fell asleep again. In the morning, sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, harsh and unforgiving, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. The events of the night distant, unreal. I dressed quickly, eager to get back on the road, and carried my bag toward the office to check out. The door was unlocked, but inside, the desk was empty. The ledger still open to the same page. My name, the only entry. I called out, no answer. I waited a few minutes, then left my key on the counter. A little annoyed now, telling myself some places just operated like that. As I turned to leave, I noticed something on the counter I hadn't seen before. A receipt, neatly printed, with my name at the top. It read, checked out, 2:58 a.m. I stared at it, my mind refusing to make sense of what I was seeing, because that was the exact time I'd last checked my phone before falling asleep, the time before the footsteps, before the call. I picked up the receipt, my hands cold, and that's when I noticed the room number listed wasn't 6, it was 5. I left without another word, got in my car, and drove until the motel disappeared in my rearview mirror, the desert swallowing it whole. Later, days later, when I told myself I was calmer, I tried to look it up, tried to find any record of that place online, but all I found were old listings marked permanently closed, reviews from years ago talking about friendly staff and clean rooms. Nothing recent. Nothing about empty nights or strange calls. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room late at night, I still think about that receipt, about the idea that somehow, without knowing it, I'd already checked out, that whatever version of me stayed there after 2:58 wasn't the one who drove away in the morning. And the thought settles over me like a shadow, heavy and inescapable, because I can't shake the feeling that the motel wasn't empty at all, and that I wasn't its only guest, just the last one who noticed. I never planned to be in that hospital after midnight, and if there's one thing I've learned since then, it's that places like that don't care about your plans anyway. They only care that you showed up. My name is Andrew. I was 32 at the time, living in Scranton, Pennsylvania, working remotely for a logistics company while taking care of my father after his second stroke. And the only reason I was at Mercy General that night was because he'd woken up confused, insisting there was pressure in his chest that wouldn't go away. The kind of complaint you don't argue with, no matter how many false alarms you've already had. The ER was overflowing when we arrived, stretchers lining the hallways, nurses moving fast but looking exhausted. And after hours of waiting, tests, and quiet conversations behind curtains, a doctor finally told me my dad was stable enough to stay overnight for observation in one of the few wings still open at that hour. The older East Wing that hadn't yet been renovated or shut down completely. I remember being relieved, grateful even, because it meant I didn't have to drive him back home just to come back again in the morning. And when a nurse told me I could stay as long as I didn't get in the way, I agreed without hesitation. Around 12:30 a.m., after my dad fell asleep, I stepped out into the hallway to stretch my legs, the smell of antiseptic and old linoleum thick in the air, the lights dimmer than during the day, set to some kind of energy-saving night mode that cast everything in a dull yellow haze. The East Wing felt different from the rest of the hospital, quieter, heavier somehow, with longer hallways and fewer windows, the kind of place built in another era when hospitals were meant to feel imposing rather than comforting. Most of the rooms were dark, their doors closed, some marked with laminated signs that read "Closed" or "Out of Service." And the further I walked, the more aware I became of how alone I was. My footsteps echoing softly, too softly, like the sound was being absorbed before it could fully form. At the far end of the wing was a small waiting area with plastic chairs, a muted TV mounted in the corner showing a local news loop with the volume off, and a nurse's station that looked abandoned, papers stacked neatly, monitors dark. I checked my phone, no new messages, the time just past 1 a.m. And that's when I heard my name over the intercom. It wasn't loud, just a calm, neutral announcement. "Andrew Miller, please return to the East Wing," spoken in the same tone hospitals use for everything. And my first thought was that my dad needed me. So I turned around and headed back the way I came. The thing that stuck with me later was the phrasing, because I was already in the East Wing and there was no reason to tell me to return to it. When I got back to my dad's room, he was still asleep, his breathing slow and even, the monitor beside him tracing steady lines that meant nothing was wrong. I sat down again, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine, telling myself the intercom announcement was just a mistake, someone reading from a list, not realizing where I was. After a while, boredom set in, the kind that makes your mind wander into places you'd rather not go. And I found myself thinking about my mom, who had died in that same hospital 10 years earlier after a long battle with cancer. Though not in this wing, not that I remembered. And I wondered briefly if that memory was coloring how the place felt, making everything seem darker than it really was. Around 2 a.m., my dad stirred, opened his eyes, and asked me what time it was. And when I told him, he frowned and said he thought it was later, that he'd heard someone call him. I asked who, and he shook his head, already drifting back to sleep. And I told myself patients hear things all the time, that it didn't mean anything. A few minutes later, I stepped out again, this time just to get a cup of water from the dispenser near the nurse's station. And as I filled the cup, I noticed one of the monitors flicker on by itself, its screen glowing pale blue, displaying a patient name I didn't recognize, along with a heart rate reading that slowly climbed, then stabilized. I stared at it, confused, because there were no patients assigned to that station, at least not that I'd seen. And as I watched, the name on the screen changed to mine, Andrew Miller. The heart rate spiked briefly, then settled into a steady rhythm. I felt my mouth go dry, my hand tightening around the cup until the plastic crinkled, and I reached out, tapping the screen, thinking it was some kind of glitch, but it didn't respond. Then, just as suddenly as it had turned on, it went dark again, leaving my reflection staring back at me in the black glass. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the hum of the lights, the distant beeping from somewhere deeper in the hospital. And when nothing else happened, I forced myself to laugh it off quietly, took a sip of water, and went back to my dad's room. I tried to distract myself by reading, scrolling through old photos on my phone, anything to keep my thoughts grounded. But the sense of being watched wouldn't go away, not in a threatening way, more like the awareness of being observed as part of a process you don't understand. At 2:47 a.m., the intercom crackled again, and this time, there was no mistaking it. The voice was closer, softer, saying, "Andrew Miller, please prepare for transfer." And I felt my heart jump, my breath catching, because transfer wasn't something you announced casually, not without context. I stood up, stepped into the hallway, and called out, asking who was there. What they meant? My voice sounding small and wrong in the empty space. The lights flickered slightly, not enough to go out, just enough to remind me they could. And from somewhere down the hall, I heard the faint squeak of wheels, like a gurney being pushed slowly across the floor. I walked toward the sound, every instinct telling me not to, but some deeper part of me needing to see, needing to confirm that there was a rational explanation. And as I rounded the corner near the closed rooms, I saw a nurse standing beside a gurney, her back to me, her posture relaxed, unhurried. She wore scrubs that looked older than the ones I was used to seeing, a faded blue, and her hair was pulled back in a style that felt out of place, like something from an old photograph. I asked her what was going on, why my name was being called, and she turned slowly, her face calm, professional, with eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. She said, "You're ready to be moved," as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I told her she had the wrong person, that I wasn't a patient, that my father was the one admitted. And she nodded, like she'd expected that response, and said, "Everyone says that at first." The gurney beside her was empty, its sheet neatly folded back, waiting. I felt a cold spread through my chest, my mind racing, and I backed away, shaking my head, saying no, saying I needed to go back to my dad, that this was a mistake. She didn't follow me. She didn't react at all. She just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the rail of the gurney, watching as I retreated down the hallway. When I reached my dad's room, my relief was immediate and crushing, because it meant this was real, that something had just happened that I couldn't explain away. And as I stepped inside, my relief turned to confusion. The bed was empty. The monitor was off. The room looked exactly like it had earlier, but without my father in it. The sheets smoothed, the pillow undisturbed, like no one had ever been there at all. I rushed back into the hallway, calling his name, my voice echoing now, too loud. And that's when the intercom spoke again, closer than ever. "Andrew Miller, final call." And the sound of wheels returned, this time from behind me. I didn't turn around. I ran. I ran down the east wing, past closed doors and dark rooms, my footsteps pounding, my breath ragged, until I reached the double doors that separated the wing from the rest of the hospital. And when I pushed them open, the noise and light hit me like a wave. Nurses at stations, patients in chairs, the normal chaos of a working hospital. I stopped the first staff member I saw, babbling, asking where my father was, telling them he'd been admitted to the East Wing, that he was missing. and they looked at me with concern, then confusion, then something like pity. A doctor checked the system, frowned, and told me there was no record of my father being admitted that night, that there hadn't been any patients assigned to the East Wing since 11 p.m., when it was officially closed. I argued, insisted, showed them my messages, my photos, but nothing proved what I knew had happened. And eventually, they told me my father was still at home, that there had been no ambulance call, no ER visit, nothing. I left the hospital at dawn, shaking, exhausted, my mind fractured. And when I got home, my father was asleep in his bed, breathing steadily, exactly as I'd left him hours earlier, with no memory of chest pain, no recollection of going anywhere. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't tell anyone, but sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying awake, I hear the echo of wheels on linoleum, and I think about that empty gurney, about the idea that there is a version of me still in that wing, waiting to be moved out of the open part of the hospital. And I can't shake the feeling that one night, when I least expect it, they're going to finish the transfer, whether I'm ready or not.